Thanks for coming. We're blessed to have worked with Robin for many years and done, I think, 4 shows. A little alter ego show by Robin at the Katzen Center a couple of years ago, which involved, for the first time, the most direct relationship between Robin's visual work and his musical career. And when we began to put this show together, when Robin started to talk about the ideas in the show, this idea of payback, we were at first a little bit off-put. You can imagine that trying to do what we do as dealers, which is to bring people in and seduce them, show them the love, get them as close as possible to the quality of art. The last thing we want to do is have them thinking about the money, the payback. Or at least that's the way we read it. You know, being one-dimensional dealer types, aggressively seeking to slip our hands into the pocketbook of the most wealthy people on the planet. So, then after we came to some realization that the big payback to Robin meant something else, this ever-flowing exchange between the visual arts and the musical arts, or between our whole sense of being and the way we produce things that are our better side, our better angels, so to speak. So, you know, the thoughts that went through our head were to broaden the context in which we started to look at this work. Not just the payback that Robin was talking to, as in James Brown was so good to me. Or that there is a cheating heart. So it didn't take a big jump to begin to think about that broader career that Robin had been involved in. And having been in Washington a long time, as I can clearly see by the age of the audience, you have too, that we needed to look at the larger relationships and the more multifarious relationships that Robin had. And it took a friggin' nanosecond to start thinking about Tiny Desk Unit and the urban verbs, and to think that what would be a wonderful occasion is to bring these guys together and then pepper them with questions. So, again, the big payback is that they came in fully armed to play music. So, we're going to ask some questions, and then we may allude back into some sounds and music as you inspire and as they're so encouraged. And I'll begin the questions, but I think because we are a kind of family here with history, that it's important that we all ask questions as well. So, the first question I'll ask, you're next, okay? You'll ask the next question. The first question I'll ask is that when you play music, do you see color?
Color rose.
Yeah, rose. I see gold.
I was just talking to my wife this morning. Can you hear me? I was here for a poetry.
And there's some room back over here.
So I want to make sure that you can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I was talking to Judy this morning, my wife, and we were talking about recognition and how long it takes to recognize something. And I was thinking, you know, we've been trained by just living in the world to recognize color very quickly. When you see red, you don't even think red. You just see it's red. And if you listen to George Harrison's guitar falling over in the beginning of the song Hard Day's Night, it goes clang. You have an instantaneous recognition of that clang, such as da, 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 da. That's all you need. That's all the information you really need to kind of put that together. You got Beethoven, da, 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 clang, the Beatles, red, boom, yellow, boom. Things can come very, very quickly, but you have to be ready to move on that recognition. And for me, instead of seeing color associated with sound, I'm more likely to almost see it chemically. Yellow is very acidic. It kind of it stimulates the eye, right? And when my daughter Hannah was really young, she used to sit on my back, and when I paint, and I set out the colors that I wanted to use to paint. And I picked a jar of paint. I used powdered pigments, so they're really bright. And I hold this up. She'd sit there and hold this up. She did not hold up yellow. She'd always kid me. It was really interesting. And she responded yellow, and she was what, 3 months old or 4 months old. So I don't necessarily see color, but I'm more likely to see taste. Bitter, sweet, salty, stuff like that when I play music. The synesthetic thing for me is more almost associated like cooking, more like taste. When I play the synthesizer, it's more like cooking. You know, I need a little bit more acid, I need a little bit more bass, I need a little bit more of this, a bit more of that. Stir it a little bit more, you know, oscillate it. Robert?
Well, actually, before I even say anything like that, I want to make a slight digression while I have the floor. The first, thank George for organizing this, but more than anything, to shout out to Robin and Bob, because in all the years that we've known each other, which is, I think, going on over 30.
Don't tell.
Yeah, very long time. I played with Bob before in different projects. Obviously, Robin and I played together for several years in the band we were in.
And Robin and I played
And
movies
Robin
at the
and Bob
Hartshorn
played,
and
yes.
DC Space together, and
But this is the first time we've ever, the three of us, even as rambling as this was, that we played together. But more than that, I just want to make sure that all of you know, you probably do since you're here, how instrumental Bob has been in creating the role that NPR now plays in the world of music as one of the main gatekeepers. Bob is really instrumental in doing that. And Robin, I can't say enough about because I've known him all these years. And I just so admire his work that you can see here. And he's been doing it in the best of terms for so long, so consistently good, and has infused his paintings with so much, obviously, of his own unique personal philosophy, that they are far more than just objects of mere spectacular beauty, which they certainly are, but they embody all of his ideas, and each one evolves with each show, with each painting. Those ideas become more and more refined, and I just think his work is spectacular and needs a lot more recognition than it currently gets in this city and elsewhere.
can I just add to the Mutual Admiration Society, which is that
This is the only thing I did.
we never get together. I mean, you know, so as Robert was saying, but if it wasn't for these guys' band, I'd never play music. If I didn't play music, I'd never make it to an NPR and all that stuff. So these folks changed my life. Robin was the one who loaned me a synthesizer one night when I was, you know, in my 20s, and got me to quit my job and sell my car and buy a synthesizer and join the band. So it's a little world. Robert's working now at NPR. It's a nice little. It's amazing we've never gotten together, but. If you want to speak to the...
Anyway, so color. The music I've done, it's much easier to see color after the fact, in a sense, and when I can, in the listening experience, try to understand what I have done when I created a song or created a piece of music and say, oh, I guess that's really sort of a turquoise feeling. In fact, Robin well remembers when we first started the band, I would bring down a new song to the band, particularly because of Robin and one of our other members, Linda, were both visual artists. I would start off by saying, Rose, I think this is a turquoise song. but that's as much obviously about communicating to other people as trying to understand what I had come up with as a song. So in my case, I think it's much easier to, after the fact, talk about the idea that, I think I can attribute the mood I was in when I wrote or what I was thinking about, but again, it's not until that song is sort of an intangible but finished object that I can look back and say, oh, I think I was my rosewood or my bloom or whatever. So I think that's the way I think about it.
I love the marriage of the two things, especially the moving image and sound. I have, in my head, zero imagination when it comes to playing music until I start to have something tangible, until I start to make a noise. Then I can hear what the other sound needs to be and what the next and the next, and it builds on that process. And the power that those sounds have when you add imagery, in the case of what I used to do with Robin, we used to play to Metropolis, we used to play to all those great silent films. It was magic how those two things came up. You could not, it made the music so much more animated. It also made the characters on the screen so much more animated, and I loved that. And I did theater for many years in Baltimore, which I composed for, and it was slides and moving images and bodies projected and all that kind of stuff. And what it did to the music I made in the studio at 3 in the morning, and when I saw it on stage, it sometimes brought me to tears. It was just, and not that my music was so great, but sometimes just the marriage of those two things was something other than you can imagine. And I love that. As far as color and things like that, it never happens for me, but I know that I do this project with artists called Project Song, where we bring artists into a studio to write a song for a couple of days, and one of the things we do to inspire them is to give them an image. And that sets a tone for them that they later can explain, but often in the process of making the music, can't tell you why. But when it's done, even though the process was all internal, they actually can see what it was about the tone, the key, the dynamics of the song that was, and how it connects to a picture, which they never would do unless I sat down and asked them that question, which is why it was a good first question to ask.
And I think that's what I was trying to say too, that in some ways, exactly what you were talking about with the moving image, because of the stages, scores that I've done, exactly the music in and of itself is not necessarily compelling, but added.
We're lousy composers.
Yeah. Just kind of struggle along, but with any great film score, I think in many respects, the composers themselves have said that the music is in the service of the image, and that particular kind of art form that combines all those things. So exactly what Bob is saying, when that music is added to the image, it becomes something far beyond what the music itself could express. It's only when it's married to that that it works. But I also agree with what you're saying about the project song, that you start working on something that's only afterward that you can say, oh, now I sort of see, I can translate or explain what this all meant now that it's in some way finished.
In some cases, we've seen kind of the opposite, where imagery is in service of music, and in part, the show speaks to that, and also just a wide array of from lousy to wonderful CD or album cover art. And Robin, you've actually done pieces in which you involve collectible album covers, which kind of drives collectors nuts, but
It's an offshoot of my obsessive compulsive nature. I collect records. I love albums. I like the physiology of them. I like the scale of a record. See Bob Dylan's head, it's about the same size as my head. On a CD, his head's this big. You don't quite get it. There's a lot of things that are embedded in popular culture, I think, that are sort of, very close to what you might say in primitive society is having mystical aspects of components. There's a great Bob Dylan, I'll just make this really quick, great Bob Dylan album cover, Robert Howard 61 revisited. It shows Bob standing in the front. Yeah.
There's Bob on the right.
The Fab Four. So it shows Bob Dylan standing there with his Hawaiian shirt, and the shirt is split in the middle, like that. And he's got a T-shirt under it that says Triumph Motorcycle. But what you see, me in high school, my buddies and I used to sit around and look at these albums, because we were convinced that Bob Dylan was sending a signal. We weren't sure what it was. And we would sit around, and everybody would construct the lyrics, and sit around and look at the cover. And one day, we're looking at the cover, and this is pre-psychedelics. So big and deep. Or at least pre-psychedelics for us at the time.
Yeah, right.
So I looked at the shirt, and it says, you could see the U from the word Triumph, U. And on the motorcycle, you saw the OR, U or, and on the bottom, you saw CYC, you or sick. It was like, Abraham, I had the message, it was like unbelievable. But it opened this door to me that had never been opened before, that inside of popular culture, there are ways to send information. And I think in a way, the whole deconstruction of popular cultural information is something that a lot of us are fans of. I know I'm a fan of that. I like the idea that there's a whole which is greater than some of its parts. It doesn't necessarily reveal itself quickly. It may not reveal itself at all. You have to maybe work to get it, but sometimes it's there.
I was wondering, because named these paintings after very well-known album titles, song titles, right? Song titles. If you could connect a dot here for us on a couple of them, just like say the name and what got you to put the name to that.
About 10 years ago, I've always been in bands since I was 14. And I think when you're playing music, a lot of times you don't listen to music as much as you should. You're listening to, your band, you maybe put on the song you're trying to learn, but I decided, okay, I'm going to really go back and start doing my research. And I really went back trying to figure out at what points music really changed for me, where it became more than entertainment. This original show was going to be named Shaman Showman. And all the people, John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, Jerry Garcia, John McLaughlin, Thelonious Monk, James Brown, these are not just musicians, these are people with a specific vision. And this vision has been carried out over an entire career. And I'm really interested in the concept of continuity and consistency in development of an artist's career, that this song does lead to that song, maybe not in terms of its components. In other words, it might not have been played with sax and trumpet, maybe been played with piano and sax, but there's a consistency. Like in the Beatles, from Like We Do It in the Road to Michelle, there's a consistency in those two songs that whenever you hear them, you say, that's the Beatles. They took it out to a certain level. That's what I want to do in this show. This is for John Coltrane, who's one of my big idols. And the title of the song is Love Supreme. And people who are jazz freaks, Love Supreme is like when jazz really wanted to get this mystical thing going. And Coltrane had a lot of problems, like over here on this left side. And on the right side, that sad waveform, the guy really worked really hard to try to get on top of the problem. But problem or no problem, the center core was this spectacular, beautiful human being that wanted music to come and lift you up. He wanted to lift up. I think any artist worth their salt, they want to change themselves. That's why they make art.
I think in some way as well, that's another way. I think one of the things that the three of us all share is that we've always been, in whatever our personal experiences are, compelled, at least musically, by music that is in one way or another, we could call it transcendent, just in the way Robin explained. A musician or an artist who basically has something to say, something that's recognizable, something to say that's different than what everyone else is saying, and then more importantly, can, through their own vision and their talent and their hard work, make that into a consistent, if evolving vision over time, so that in the same way, at the very beginning, this Robin said, as soon as you hear the clang guitar opening to Hard Day's Night, instantly that's recognizable as the Beatles because they created their identity, whether it's in sound or in visual arts. And I think myself, that's particularly what I was drawn to growing up, is music that somehow, I don't mean in necessarily a mystical sense, transported me, nothing necessarily that grand, but something that just compulsively attracted me to it. I remember the first song I ever really seriously listened to over and over again, for some reason, was this, probably now we just call it Muzak. This piece called The Theme from the movie Moulin Rouge, probably back in 1953 or 54 when I was quite young. But there was something about the sonority of
He levitated from the crib.
Yeah, exactly. There was something about the sonority of that music, partly just because of the quality of the sound, the strings, but also the melody itself. And I think we were talking the other night about this idea of, is critical listening the same or as difficult or less difficult than critical viewing of painting, in the same way that I might obsess over and over again about a song, trying to hear it and break down all the component parts, put it back together again and understand how, to my mind, it works. Do we do the same thing in looking at paintings, or is it a different kind of experience? Because in the many, many years Robin and I have always talked about art and music, one of the most obvious, self-evident points is that viewing a painting, because it's a tangible object. It's just right there. You may spend hours, days just contemplating, thinking about that painting, but it's a very different initial experience than hearing a piece of music which takes place over a set period of time. You just can't hear the music unless you put the time in to hear that piece. So we talked a little bit about that the other night.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in some ways, the advantage of music, which is the thing about time, and painting, which is the thing about space, is that in a culture that has a shorter attention span and has things, you know, you're constantly being pulled one way or another, music has an advantage because it can be on while you see many things, whereas like you go into a gallery and chances are, I mean, you probably observed this, George, what's the average time someone looks at one of the works?
Yeah, it's tough to say.
And this is-
I wrote a blog piece a couple of years ago in which I fantasized that the painting itself had sensors in it to follow the eye of the viewer, which is actually technology that exists, fighter planes, that sort of thing now. And it was about that people typically get the gestalt of a painting and then move on. But the other thing is
Or think they do.
serious viewers return. And in my personal experiences is that I try not to make a judgment. And then we have the advantage of being a librarian and the books are here and we can always pull a book off the shelf and read it. And so it's usually about 3 weeks into a show where I decide whether it really works or not and which paintings or artworks really work. And that goes to the time element. And so few of us take that or are even allowed that anymore. It's odd to me that museums don't come outfitted, and we often have a bench in here. But you know, what you find is the students asleep on them.
Right. But I guess if somebody buys it, then they think, right? Yeah. If somebody buys it, then they're living with it. Then they're hearing hearing the song every day. So
and, you know, it's a technique that we use. You know, like you said, the music can be there in the background and that sort of thing. We almost always try to have people who are serious about acquiring artwork actually take it into their home and delay the decision, which is not normal sales technique. You're supposed to move towards closing the deal.
Yeah.
But we feel like if we get it to people's home, we have a chance for, put it in romantic terms, love to happen. So,
should we get
Let him have it for a few minutes.
somebody from the audience,
I
Frauke.
have a question, I think primarily to Robin. Because in the creative process, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you start out with the music, Coltrane or Lester Young or so, and then you listen to it and you go into work and say, oh, this inspires me that way? Or with these paintings, did you work them and then later on you look at them and say, oh, that really reminds me of Coltrane. I mean, I'm trying to go for the process. I think some of you have answered that the music came, that the images were there first, and then you added the music, and then the image became much more vivid. But with the paintings, I'm interested in that.
Robin, you look at the texture before you put the color.
Talk about trade secrets now.
That's a painter asking your question of a painter too. That's loaded.
I think, you know, I don't know, I'll speak for myself, but I think that if you're a fisherman, you tell them where you catch the fish. You say, over yonder. If you're a gold miner, you tell them where the mouth of the gold mine is. I think most artists become storytellers as a way to sort of, I guess, offset the despicable nature of being a liar. I have a lot of ways I do. The difference between the way I work and I think a lot of people that I know is basically what I'm interested in is I start from zero. And when you ask me, do I hear the song and paint a painting about the song, it's not about the sound of the song. It's more about the style and content of the song. In the case of this show, I used the titles of these songs essentially as red herrings. And what I mean by that is, I got so tired of painting about me. I kept thinking I've spent, a long time painting about me. I better blame it on somebody else. I've got to figure out somebody else I can set it off on. And so I just thought about, hey, wait a minute. This is sort of a form of estate planning, I guess. I decided, I owe a lot of people a lot. And in some ways it's intentional. I did meet John McLaughlin. I didn't meet Coltrane, but I did see Hendrix, and I did see Jerry, and I did see James Brown, and I saw Nick Cave. And my crazy uncle used to take me deer hunting when I was 11 took me to a juke joint out in the middle of the Ocala National Forest. And at 12 o'clock noon, I actually saw a man crying. I've never seen men cry before. And on the jukebox was "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry" by Hank Williams. It was amazing. It did something to me. It changed my life in a little way, but the music changed my life in the sense that I saw a direct relationship between cause and effect in the art, a form of art. You know? But when you say, what comes first? Here's what comes first. I paint flat. I build these armatures. I start with a honeycomb aluminum panel. I mount linen on the panel. And I paint with encaustic, which is pure beeswax, carnauba wax, DeMar crystals, and pure pigment. And I'm a collector. I collect pigment like people who collect baseball cards. Whenever I travel, I buy pigment in whatever art shops in England or, wherever. Wherever I can get it, I get it. Mark my word, 20 years from now, you will not be able to buy cadmium red. So start stocking up now. So anyway, I make the process from start to finish. Why? Not because of some sort of proprietary thing. It's that I found that by making the instrument, I can embody the action. Does that make any sense? Okay, so I paint hot. The wax is hot. It's in a pot. I add all this stuff to it, stir it around, and it creates a medium. And here's where music and the type of painting I do interface directly. 1001, 1002. Okay. Take a brush, stick it in the pot, pull it across the canvas. 1001, 1002 is dry. I heat it up, I change the temperature just that much, maybe another 2 degrees. Now I can make a line instead of a line this long, I can make one that long. I turn the pot down, the temperature gets lower, the line is shorter. In other words, it's drying faster, right? So there's a kind of an odd relationship between the way I paint and the way I do this. Push and pull, let the sound flow out, bring the sound back. What comes first is a blank canvas, and I'm looking at that, and often what I'll do is after 2 or 3 hours of looking at it, I'm just getting so frustrated, I just dip the thing and I go like that. And that might be it. But I paint one painting at a time, period, that's it. And the one painting at a time, it's got to reach a certain point where you can't tell where it started and where it ends. That's why you can see it kind of float. Floating, you take time away, you take weight away. And that's one of the reasons why the paintings float. Now, I've been up here bullshitting for 10 minutes, avoiding the question that Frank and Bill asked me. There is no chicken or egg.
Oh, that's deep.
My horoscope this week said that I need to make an effort to take credit for things I've done that I've been unrecognized for. So just what Robin was talking about, the synthesizer, when our band first started, all these many years, Robin was playing guitar. And just because of my nature, there was no way I was going to tolerate another guitar player. But at the same time, I completely recognized from exactly what you've heard Robin talk about, that he would be an utterly brilliant synthesizer player. Because the process that he described, I saw way back when that could be just an incredible musical addition to this band we're trying to start, and that Robin was the unique individual who could translate that and who had a creative process that, in my mind, better suited into a synthesizer than a guitar. A guitar is kind of linear in many ways. And this, in some ways, to me, is analogous to his painting. So that's...
No,
I've answered my horoscope.
these are spherical instruments. They're spherical. Blues, Mudra. These are, you can make them be anything they need to be.
I think that's what attracted me to it when he showed me it, because I don't have the skill set craft to play guitar. I do play guitar now, but still don't have that craft. This is more about shape, more about a little bit about it's a constant listening process to find the sound you want. Like with a guitar, you hold down a chord and you know pretty much what you're going to wind up with. On this thing, you're seeing on Robin's instrument, you can't see it, but it's a series of sliders and buttons. And what you're doing as you're moving the slider, you are opening filters, closing filters, making things louder, softer, deeper, richer, thinner, thicker, and all that stuff. And so you don't really need the craft set to know what you're doing, but you need the ears to listen to what you're heading toward. And then when you get close, fine tune it. And that's, I think, the beauty of the synthesizer. And when you're playing with other people, like a guitar player like Robert, where he's already got this nice wash of stuff going on, you find your place inside of that to hold Robert's sound up a little bit more, or make something that makes Robert's sound shimmer a little more, and that's, I think that's the beauty of that instrument. When you start talking about the temperature of your wax and the longer and shorter of the line that you paint, this may not translate well, but it made me think of how these synthesizers open and close a filter, how you, if closing a filter would be like doing this, or calling everything calling multiples if the filter was closed, and then when you move your hand away, you're kind of opening the filter. And that's the same analogy for me as your line painting and temperature. So that, I mean, there are relationships there.
Max?
I just have, there's more of a comment than a question, but I think the key word that Robin used in relationship to the music and the paintings was the word instrument. And you said that a few minutes ago, and if you bring it all the way down to that one term, that this is your instrument, that's your instrument. And so it's really about what's going on inside that crazy head of yours.
We've been saying that for years.
Forget which instrument. Right, exactly. Forget which instrument you're using. It's you coming out in these forms. And that's, I think, the beauty of this instrument, that's what you've chosen. But I can see you being a pretty good lumberjack.
Hi, Rob. It's more of an observation, I think, and I'm speaking as an old-time fiddler who's also a painter. And listening to you play here and your paintings, which I've seen for many years, you know, and thinking about the connection between my music and my image painting, that my things are very much phrase. You know, the music I play is all about discrete parts that people hold, and I can say the same thing of paintings. But you know, your music is very all over, as are your paintings, and somebody just used the word wash, and I think I kind of see that in both things. It was really interesting for me to hear you talk about the process of making both the music and the art, because this whole notion of time, you know, paintings exist as discrete things that you experience all at once, where music unfolds over time. But the making of the paintings unfolds over time too, and I think that both in either creating or performing a piece of music, you're getting from point A to point Z, and you're really in a way doing that same thing in a very different way. But it's always our sensibilities, whether they're musical sensibilities or artistic sensibilities, are applied to that process of getting from A to Z. That wasn't my question.
B to Z.
Robin, I first want to just say thank you for showing this beautiful art. I've come, this is my third time. And this is a question as an encaustic artist. Encaustic it takes a lot to control the wax. And when I look at your work, it's inspiring to me because it's so pristine. How did you get to the point, or the question is, how long did it take you to be able to control it so it's so pristine? I mean, what was it? What happened to you inside? Was it like, you know what to do, and it just happened, or what was that process of expertise? You understand?
The sound effect I've been doing a long time. I never approached this, you know, as in a linear fashion. The way I work is like spherical again, like from the center out to an arc, or say an onion. You have this arc, you have this arc, you have this arc. So this painting may be arc A. The blue painting may be arc Z. That painting may be arc C. So they don't go A, B, C, D like that, like you would think. This would lead to that, and that would lead to that. then they are internally created in such a way that they are their own entities. Does that make any sense? They're like a complete entity in themselves, but there's, and one of the things, if you look at most of my paintings, there's a slight glow. That's my own little thing. You know, luminosity I see as like the sort of indicative of optimism. Like there's a little bit of something left there yet that you haven't quite gotten. You can't quite control it, you can't quite dominate it, you can't quite take it. Neither here nor there is sort of a good example of my work. I mess around with foreground, midground, and background and try to take those things and make them more oblique so that they're not as obvious what the foreground, midground, background is. I mean, Jerry Garcia painting was probably the best example of this.
Which one's that? Which one's Garcia?
Dark Star.
Oh, yeah.
Which I heard Jerry play in San Francisco in the Summer of Love. I have to admit, it stuck with me. It took them 6 hours about to get there, but they did finally get there. So anyway, I think encaustic is mutable. I'm a Virgo, the sign of mutability. I'm number 6 in the zodiac. My daughter knows astrology. She explain all this. Number 6 is, you know, a lot of things in the natural world are made out of things like that. And in fact, the panels, you can see the honeycomb on the side. If you just rip this off the front, in the side you see these little 6-sided honeycombs that create the honeycomb panel. So there's an aspect when I work that I try to get each painting to get to the same point as the other painting, even though they don't look alike. Does that make any sense? It's some sort of thing that has just happened to me over years of doing this. Encaustic is hard to control because you get an effect really quickly, and that's always really nice. You know, you get an incredible feeling about, oh God, I did it, it's great. But as my wife Judy will tell you, sometimes she'll come down, I'll have a painting on the table, and it'll be finished, or I think it's finished, or it looks finished. She said, I love it. Comes back the next day, and I had to do something to it. I had to, like Jasper Johns, I do something to it, and I do something to it again. It's a painting, but not the painting. You understand what I mean? And so I work in layers. And so you ask me, how do you get to this point? Layers. Continuity and consistency in time. You can't learn this stuff overnight. It's like playing the piano. At some point, the keys aren't there, and the mood is there. You know, the art is there, but the keys aren't there. You're not going A, B, C, D. You know, that kind of stuff. And in a way, it's taken me this long to get to that kind of point where the keys aren't there anymore. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
One insight I had into Robin's work, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I don't remember precisely, but when I first met Robin, excuse me, there was even though his technique obviously was working with encaustics and creating textures, most of his paintings at that point had a sort of basic framework where he created a proscenium, sort of a stage that we talked about. I said this is gold is supposed to draw you into the painting. And I had a friend, a kind of verbal wag, who said, oh, that's Robin's diving board period. The idea that you dive into the painting. And about roughly 10 or 12 years ago, over time and evolving his work, the proscenium disappeared. I remember he did a show, a different gallery, where where I saw the first paintings without the diving board, without the proscenium to draw you into the work. And to me, it was a revelation because he'd sort of left, stylistically, but also in his artistic involvement, left that device behind. He didn't need it any longer to create that sense. And I remember seeing these paintings, some of which were a little bit like the Miles Davis kind of blue painting, swirling textures and strange bubbles and all sorts of things. And I walked in and said, Robin, you've gone off the diving board, you're in the pool now. So these things are sort of, you're in the water sensing what's going on. So I thought that was a really, whether it was significant or not, but a very noticeable change in his work over time.
Your description of building your paintings is really the description of playing music for me when I'm alone. It's really about laying something down, laying something on top of it. And after a while, you have no idea which was the guitar, what was the mountain dulcimer, what was the synthesizer. That's the moment that you know it's finished. Really.
Do you think there's such a thing, Bob, as an envelope?
Yeah, you mean?
Well, and that you're painting, like the way we were doing it. Some people say this music, some people wouldn't. But at a certain point, the tones and the textures of the harmonics, there's this sort of overlap that creates like an envelope, almost like you, when you're running and you get an endorphin thing,
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
you know, or some sort of thing where there's this bizarre envelope.
I don't understand that term in this context, but I do know that there's that space that you get to where I don't know what Robert's making, I don't know what you're doing, I don't really know what I'm doing that's making this whole, but I know we've hit the sweet spot, and let's find that. It's like Dark Star 6 hours later,
Yeah.
you know, that's the moment you're aiming for. It isn't all that. It's a building process to get there. You are, when you're listening to us, what sounds like noodling, at some point, it is us fine-tuning. It is us trying to get to a place. It's us taking, you know, those steps there, and sometimes you get there, and sometimes you don't.
Do you think the audience deserves that? No, that chance, that risk.
That's why I go to, I mean, the music shows that touch my heart the most are the ones where the artist is taking a risk, where the artist is doing something that they don't normally do, and it works. It doesn't always work. I'm with them all the way, whether it works or not. Andrew Bird played at the Sixth of the Night Synagogue doing his music that wasn't his normal pop songs. Loop pedals, violin, his whistling, his singing, and he would start a piece, and it would sound kind of just, you know, it's okay, I don't know what's going on here yet, I'm with you, Andrew, take me with you, and then 2 minutes in, you say, no, I'm going to do something else, and you just start again, and I think that's really brave of someone to do in front of an audience, and because it worked sometimes, and because it didn't work other times, it made those moments so beautiful. Because you can see it in the either the eyes of the performer or the closed eyes of the performer when they hit that place that they got there, and the audience is with them. I love that.
Yeah, I actually kind of disagree with that. As a performer, I mean, I agree in Bob's perception of it for sure, but as a practice, I would never want to do that. I would rarely, if ever, want to do that unless I were totally surrounded by people I understood, but I'd never want to go to a place and just I'm going to try to do this in front of an audience.
We just did that.
With a few exceptions.
Yes.
And the older I get, the more exceptions
I've been
there
trying to
are.
get Robert to do this for years.
right.
I said, Robert, come on.
It's hard to
We
let
need
go.
that. Throw the structure away.
But right,
Let's
I
just
mean-
get in and do it, you know?
The songs when I came to see you play were well formed,
Oh, yeah.
but there were still those moments where those songs, which, you know, I probably saw you guys 90 times, where sometimes those songs hit this moment, but sometimes they hit that other moment.
no.
And so your bass is just a lot more formed. And it's,
Right, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, that I would never, and I don't, as an audience member, more specifically, I'm not sure that what I would feel about an artist that had asked me to pay to see them just so they could maybe, I think I'll try this for you guys and see if it works. I'm not sure how I would feel about
Well,
that.
Chef does that.
I saw an awful lot of
Tonight, the
concerts. DC
special on
Space
the
that did
menu
that.
is.
No, I know,
I like
I was never a big fan of it.
Yeah.
Guava and grapefruit, you know, I mean, come on. You know, that's, they did
I have
that.
a question.
Yeah.
Would you guys play?
Look right, everybody out there. We're used to playing a lot louder.
Play as loud as you like.
You can take it, even as a procession, so leave the building.
The next movement is that you can't carry it into the taxi, out of the taxi, you can't play it.
Let's keep it time-wise relatively reasonable, because there's a lot of people in here I want to say hello to. For sure. Do you want to do the piece that has that sort of scale loop in it?
Yeah.
Hey? Okay.
These get hot. This synthesizer I'm using is like arcane. I mean, this thing's 30 years old.
This doesn't get hot at all.
Bob's has mine and 10 other ones inside it. And I'm not just analog on purpose, believe me. But I'm so cheap, I just won't buy one of those things. So I just keep augmenting this one. I'm using a chaos layer and a chaos pad on here, which are digitally controlled synthesizers, which feed into my analog
But I
synthesizer.
think the other thing that's interesting to point out too is that this synthesizer is comparable almost like a 52 Telecaster.
Yeah, it is the
It
Telecaster.
is, but it also is very tactile
Yeah,
in a different way than Bob's is. And I think, again, Robin,
yeah.
exactly what Bob was talking about, shaping the sound, shaping the waveform, using all these devices. Robin is used to doing this with physical tactile controls. Bob has, as always, graduated to the future. And is really,
But this actually is incredibly tactile in an odd way, because these are little keys here, and so this is Moog just finished doing this. I visited their factories last month, and they literally just finished this software synth. And so the higher I play on the key, so it's actually, I have one of those, and this is really, what you can do with this is fairly unbelievable. Yeah.
and I just like this
Yeah.
block.
Where do you want to go?
Thank you.
Made up the-